So hello everyone, and welcome to this, the third of a three-part series, looking at some really big issues, if you like, or causes of stress. So we have had a look at happiness as a direct antidote to stress. In a way, that's kind of like the main heading really of everything, because then there's some subheadings, if you like, where there's categories of that. And they are things like understanding misinterpretations. Often I say understanding, maybe better understanding how some key elements of our mental or psychological lives actually work. So we looked at yesterday, firstly, the day before, Monday, we looked at differentiating types of happiness and trying to figure out how to go about the more healthy kind, or at least how to use the hedonic in service of the genuine, which is where you really get, when you hit that balance, stress falls away. And actually, I haven't mentioned that. This approach, I have mentioned this, and I'll reiterate. We always talk about stress as being this kind of, alleviate stress. But stress is like all these different things that all combine together to cause you this sensation or these mental and physical sort of experience of stress. And we can break, if we really want to alleviate that or sort of have it, we'd say adaptive rather than maladaptive in psychology, that is helpful rather than harmful, then you need to sort of understand how it works better, right? And we don't do a very good job in our education system in general in the West. I also think we do a terrible job of getting a lot of the findings and interesting things that researchers are discovering. It's a really terrible effort at getting that really useful day-to-day information out to the general public, especially in terms of mental health. And so that's kind of a big mission of mine, is that I sort of sit in an area where I happen to have a background in Buddhist things as well, because I have this background in Sanskrit and Tibetan and so on. And a lot of what I've learned there is very Buddhist, and it should stay there. But a lot of what I've learned there is quite helpful for people in their everyday lives as well. And the same is true for research. A lot of people are researching things because they're interested in them and they want to help. And that's the motivation of most researchers. And so there's a lot of things they're finding and discovering and publishing that just aren't making it into the mainstream sort of view of things, which is a shame, because what happens then is we're left with these old views of things, like, just reduce stress, but no real details about what stress is. Or compassion fatigue, which we'll see today, doesn't exist at all, but nonetheless, people talk about it all the time. The reason they talk about a thing that doesn't exist, compassion fatigue, is because they don't understand compassion. And so what I think there's not really been, I shouldn't say that, there's been very little, because there has been some effort, there's been very little effort to try to get this information kind of collated into something easy to understand and digestible and out to the public. And the people who have been doing that, who are really interested in doing it and worked very hard to do it, and there's a lot of them around the world, are largely ignored, realistically. So there you go, there's a rant, and I haven't even finished my coffee. But so I should put it down. So so let's get on with it, shall we? I'll excuse me just a moment. There we go. So starting soon. So as I mentioned, we're looking at these three really big causes of stress. We're interested in pulling stress out from the root, right? Not for screwing around, messing around with, the symptoms, or, sort of kind of half understanding of it. And in order to do that, of course, you just need to put some time aside. So if you can, please, put your phone somewhere else, close some other tabs. This isn't going to take that long. Hopefully it's of direct interest to you. So just treat this as time that it's a luxury item, right? So you want to pay attention to it and get as much as you can from it. I've said this, that was my third day, so I just want to be clear about it. I'm saying that my sort of goal in these 3 sessions that we've done, or in the middle of, is to help you know how you can interrupt some underlying causes of stress. So there's all these things that are happening, they're sort of happening to you that are causing stress. But it's not a one-way street. There are certain things that you're doing as well, and there are certain misinterpretations. I'll get in trouble if I say mistakes, maybe. There are certain misinterpretations that of things and your experience that are causing some of the stress. So as soon as you can interrupt those, you're in a really powerful position to start to, kind of use what stress you do experience to your advantage rather than have it work against you. So let me ask you this, as I have in the last few sessions. Have you ever, so it's sort of like a game we've been playing at the beginning, have you ever felt overwhelmed by the difficulties of other people? So of course, we've all been overwhelmed by our own difficulties, probably. That's, to be expected. But have you ever felt overwhelmed or really got strung out by things that you've observed happening to someone else or a group of other people? Any no's? Let me know in the chat. Are there yeses or no? Yes. And this can be someone in person. You could be watching the news. You could be watching a movie that's not even real. That, which is a fascinating sort of whole other thing we'll have to talk about some other time. Yeah, good. Okay. Yeah, of course. Have you ever, and so here's especially, a lot of people might have heard or thought, that they care too much. I hear this a lot. You don't. Nobody does, but we'll come to that. For our healthcare professionals or carers in general, again, being told to keep a professional distance. This is a common one. As we'll see, that is, it's almost cruel to tell somebody that for reasons that we'll see. Have you been warned about compassion fatigue and still felt overwhelmed? And I know that for a lot of people watching, then the answer is going to be yes. And you'll be relieved to know, as was the case in the last 2 sessions, that I'm going to say it's not really your fault, okay? So what we're going to look at is empathy and compassion and how they work together and why they're different and why we get it so wrong so often, especially in modern Western culture. And what that will be is part of, as I've mentioned already, is to think about, learning well-being as a skill, something you can learn to do. That when you get good at it, you can start your day confident, you can handle what's coming. I've been saying this each morning, but it's really important to think about this, that you can finish your day or walk away from whatever responsibilities you have, confident you've handled things well, right? And then of course that feeds into what I just said, which is, heading back next time confident you can handle what's happening. Not that it will be easy, not that it will always be pleasant. I'm not saying that. This is not a positive thinking session. I'm dead against all that positive thinking stuff, quite frankly. Which is, I should write these down. There's another session we have to have sometime. And yeah, the purpose of this is, finally feeling that you're doing your best. And this is the problem a lot of us have, myself included. I get stressed out with all sorts of things I have going on. Maybe for me, it's a lot of deadlines and so on. And then when I do finally pull off the deadline, I don't feel like I did it at my best, and that causes me more stress and so on. So there's a little cycle here that we need to be able to recognize and break. And this idea of happiness, guilt, and regret, and now empathy and compassion are just 3 ways or 3 tools that you can do that. The last couple of days, I think the first day I explained who I was. I started off as a musician. I learned to meditate, in the Himalayas because I was interested in playing. Well, learned to meditate to play music better. I went to the Himalayas and actually ended up learning Tibetan language and studying a lot of the Buddhist philosophy and so on over there. Right now, I'm in the middle of a PhD, actually looking at a lot of the topics I'm talking about here in terms of mindfulness and empathy, compassion, and so on. Okay, but you're here about this. It's not your fault. And as I've already said the last few days, there's a simpler way. And what we're trying to do is understand how stress works, or at least some causes of stress, and and ways of dealing with it. And I've been presenting two types, two ways. Drown it out or figure it out is the way I've been presenting it. We've talked about this the last couple of days, so I won't spend time on it, but I just want to reiterate this each time, that what these sessions are about, that drowning it out has a time and a place, right? And it's okay. Of the two types of drowning it out that I've put up there, the healthy ones are probably a better option, exercise and these sorts of things, going for a walk and getting out in nature, visiting your friends, these sorts of things, if you're not in lockdown, of course. But what we're interested in is understanding it and short-circuiting it, interrupting it. And even get it on your side, right? Okay. And to do that, as I mentioned already, we have these three topics. We looked at types of happiness, which was looking at Eudaimonia, or genuine happiness, versus hedonic happiness. Yesterday, we looked at guilt and regret. I tied that in with rumination about how past events or things we've said and done in the past can pull us down, but actually there are ways we can kind of bounce off them and to do better next time, right? So that's what happened yesterday. And then today we're looking at empathy and compassion, and with a little side note about the danger of believing in compassion fatigue, I guess. Yeah. Okay. And these sorts of things too, I should say, like the breaking things down into the causes of the dis-ease or the discomfort or the stress. That's a big part of what I'm about. I mentioned that at the beginning. It's a big part of why I put together this online course, the Beyond Mindfulness method, was so that people could access that, get information that they can use in real time, in the course of a week, and also use the tools to try to get out from under stress, to get out from under overwhelm, I say sometimes. And we often meet, we do meet every Monday online. There's a session for the people in that course. There's a discussion, we bounce around some questions. And so 3 of the most interesting kind of topics or questions that have come up in the last few weeks are these 3. That's why I've put this on, so that those of you sort of who are in my free Facebook group or just randomly stumbled across me on the internet, then at least some of you can have a little bit of benefit of some of those discussions as well. Okay. So this is an approach, I want to be clear, it is an approach that works. This empathy-compassion distinction, it has worked for thousands of years in contemplative traditions, but it's also working with paramedics, oncology nurses, hospice workers, these sorts of, general practitioners, even psychologists who I've already worked with using this approach to try to help them through. I even had one case where there was a general practitioner working with me, really close to burnout and stress. COVID-19 had just hit, so extra stress for sure. And within a couple of weeks of using some of these techniques that we talked about, she started running ahead of time. I've never been to a doctor who was early. So there are some really simple fixes here that can go a long way for us. Okay, here we are, empathy. I just pulled out a dictionary definition for this, right? So I'm not making this up or pulling it from some obscure source, Webster's English Dictionary. The action of understanding, being aware of the experience of another without the feelings, thoughts, and experience communicated in an objectively explicit manner. What we're interested in here really is that you're understanding the experience of somebody else or other people, right? Some other people, and understanding their experience without them telling it to you or explaining it to you or so on. It's just by observing it, you understand it very deeply, sometimes even experience it as well. When we talk about empathy, there are 2 types. Okay, we have this cognitive type, which is an intellectual understanding of someone's experience. So perhaps you see somebody, I don't know, who's sunburned or something, and you've never been sunburned. And you can see it and think, oh yeah, I understand that really hurts. You don't actually experience the pain yourself, but you understand. It can even be, and this does happen a lot with people, you can even see that people are experiencing a type of distress that you've experienced yourself, and still you don't sort of resonate with it, you just understand it. You go, yeah, that really sucks, kind of a response. And so cognitive. The second type is affective. And an affective empathy is when you actually share in the experience. Very eminent emotions and compassion researcher, actually Paul Ekman, talks about resonating. You talk about high resonators and low resonators. Anyway, what is worth knowing, because when you are hearing about empathy in the mainstream media and also in research papers, if you read those sorts of things, which I end up doing, they do not very often distinguish between these two types of empathy, which is a shame because they are actually differentiable. They're distinguishable. That is to say, you move one, you can get higher and lower on one without it affecting the other. Okay, and they are, important. I sometimes joke, or maybe I shouldn't, but I sometimes joke about if I wanted to hire a torturer, I would hire someone high in cognitive empathy but very low in affective empathy. That's not a job a high resonator could do. But while we're talking about a high resonator, someone high in affective empathy, these are the sorts of people who are drawn to helping, caring professions, be they educators, healthcare professionals, and so on. And this is kind of a problem because, of course, once you're high in affective empathy and you're dealing with other people who are in distress, I mean, that's your job, which is very, very, very impressive. Then, of course, you start to resonate and share in the distress of the other people. And that's across the board. If you have somebody in physical pain and you will feel their distress from the physical pain. If they have a family who are in all this emotional distress about it, then you're going to feel that as well. So that's a lot of stuff coming at you. And that, I mean, think about causes of stress. Here I am trying to talk about causes of stress. If meeting distressed people puts you in distress, and I'm here to tell you that it does to some degree, right? Some more than others. Then a job that attracts people who are high in affective empathy, right? It attracts resonators. And when they get to this job, what they mostly encounter are people in distress, right? And then these people, of course, share the distress as well. And this really isn't very surprising. They get exhausted, right? They burn out. And then we spend all this time and money trying to figure out what's wrong with them, when the answer is nothing, actually. In fact, one of the things that's been wrong, to be honest, with the system is that a lot of these people have been trained and told to keep a professional distance, right? They're basically being told not to resonate, which they can't do because they naturally resonate. This is kind of a trait thing that some people have, although it's changeable. And so then they say, okay, yeah, I won't have this empathic response to everyone, which they will, even though they've been told not to. And then they think there's something wrong with them when in fact there's not. What's actually happened in this situation is that they were given bad advice. I mean, it's not just bad advice. If it wasn't coming from a place of ignorance, it would be mean. Like telling a high resonator not to get, to keep a professional distance and not, share in the experience would be cruel if you know how it works. So it's just really, really kind of dumb. And there is a way out, right? Being high in affective empathy is not a one-way ticket to burnout if you have the right training, which isn't part of a lot of curriculum, although I will say that is changing. Of course, when we talk about empathy, we do tend to, most people sort of think more about affective than they do cognitive, right? You think about those people who, you know it too, if you see someone, I don't know, hit in the head with a tennis ball or something, you'd grab the same part of the head that was hit. We have these sorts of just automatic kind of resonating with others. And I'll say it again, just to be clear, because it'll be new to some of you. Of course, these are the sorts of people who are drawn to the very professions where they will encounter a lot of difficulty and distress, and they'll share in it too. So if that's all you've got, then that is a one-way ticket to burnout. If you're not given good advice about how to deal with that, then you're in trouble. And I showed on the first day some of the sort of advice people get, which is drink more water, just say no, be proactive, not reactive, like utterly useless advice for people who are in all this distress. I mean, just completely useless. And that's from a really good organization who, of course, I'm not going to name. That's just the paradigm, okay? So then, I'm big on defining, my terms here. So I like to make sure we all understand what we're talking about. So what is it then? What do we do for people who are really high in empathy on a one-way ticket to burnout? What do we do for these people? They're inevitably the people who are going to be drawn to teaching and caring, healthcare professions, right? So what can we do for them? Because they're an important resource. They're also very expensive to retrain, like realistically. And the answer is compassion. So compassion training in particular. So I've put up here again, it's from the Webster's English Dictionary as well, a definition of compassion. It's very similar to a Buddhist definition, actually, for most Buddhist definitions, which says a sympathetic consciousness or understanding of others' distress together with a desire to alleviate it. So it's sort of got the component of empathy, which is the understanding of someone else's distress with a desire to alleviate it. This is very similar in Buddhism, certainly in Tibetan Buddhism. Compassion is defined as an aspiration that, let's say, people don't suffer, just to paraphrase it. Of course, it's not just people, but let's just stick with people for now. And so an aspiration, and from a Buddhist perspective, I'm just going to insert it here because it's relevant in a secular context, that in the beginning, that's going to be easier for some than others, right? That's no problem. Everyone knows that. It's easier maybe for your family members and people close to you, and harder for people that you disagree with, for example, or don't know. And also, it's not always uncontrived. It's not always automatic. Sometimes that, even if we see, I'll give you an example actually, just to slip back over my research hat. For example, people who live with depression, so they're sad a lot, of course, right? And that can actually make people who deal with them regularly quite angry, right? That you might have this sort of compassionate response most of the time, but every now and then someone will just, they'll just get annoyed at again dealing with another person who's all sad and unhappy for apparently unreasonable reasons. I'm not saying that this is the way things should be, it's just the way things are. And so again, while there might be, you see someone who's sad, you experience some sadness yourself, right? So that's empathy. And then you really wish that the person wasn't sad, that there was something you could do to help them. Then this is compassion. And remember, this is all mental, right? Could help them. But then from time to time, you might be tired or hungry, or you've been dealing with this person a lot and that you've got other things you need to do, who knows? And their sadness and depression actually gets a bit annoying, right? And so that compassionate response, you feel the empathy, you get a bit sad too, but actually it triggers you into a bit of annoyance and anger, right? Rather than the compassionate response. This is okay, this is really normal, this happens. And it's just an example of why this word in the other definition I've given, uncontrived wish, is so important, because it's quite hard to always come from a position where you're wishing the other person be free of any suffering or difficulties that they're experiencing. And I've got lots of examples I've come to, but that's just for people Then of course it gets harder for people who you don't know, even though it's healthy for us to have this compassionate response. There's a lot of research into that. It's harder for people that we don't know so well, and it's even harder for people who maybe we disagree with, or we find annoying, or have kind of annoyed us or harmed us some way in the past. Okay. So is that all right? You can drop any questions in as we go, of course. So there you have it, empathy and compassion. And I guess what's worth understanding here, was a question that I do often get asked, is that, in fact, let me just lay it out as a kind of summary. If you have high levels of affective empathy, right, then every time you come across people who are in distress, you're going to get all distressed as well. Okay, right, to some degree. And that's okay. But that is empathy. There is no compassion involved in that. And here's the problem, is that our culture tends to, our use of the language too, often combines the two terms, which is causing a lot of people a lot of stress. So there's no compassion involved in an empathic response, okay? Like flat out, I mean, read the definitions, you don't need me to tell you. Compassion is actually this cognitive intention, it's mental intention, right? Or an aspiration, we say sometimes, that people, including yourself, so including the subject and the object, including yourself, not experience, right? That's compassion. So can you have compassion without empathy? Well, actually, no, you can't. Because if you don't at least have some understanding of the difficulty of the person in front, right, then it's going to be very difficult to wish they were free of it. So actually, you need at least cognitive empathy, right, at least, whereas that affective empathy is quite helpful. But then, that empathy needs to be observed, noticed, and turned into compassion, which takes some work. And I just sort of refer you back to the last 2 days, because there is a very common theme in what I'm talking about here. And I'm going to bring this up again, but it needs to be driven home a few times. If you think about the first day, I was saying that there are 2 types of happiness, hedonic and genuine, and that this genuine type of happiness often appears as the hedonic. I sort of think of it that there's that piece of cake, piece of pizza, beer, drugs, TV, thing you want to buy in a shop, whatever. They all really look like they're going to deliver you this genuine sense of happiness that will last. That's what it looks like. That's the appearance. And so what happens is you need to be able to catch that appearance and say, oh, actually, you know what? That isn't going to cause me any long-term sort of happiness and stable well-being, right? That doesn't mean you don't go ahead and, and do it anyway. Of course you can, just your expectations need to be measured. So it's this idea of catching yourself in a kind of misinterpretation, or catching yourself in a habit and thinking, oh, actually, I don't need this as much as I think I do, in order to sort of be happy, if you like. There's the same with guilt and regret, that, we remember something we've said and done in the past. And then if, the guilt sort of arises and you start to think, oh, why, I'm a bad person, like, well, why would I do this? What's wrong with me? Sort of thinking. That when you catch yourself doing that and get a bit of training, then you can flip that over into this sort of sense of regret. It's like, yeah, I really do wish I hadn't done that. With some help and some support, with courses like the We Run and these sorts of things, you can sort of understand why you might have done that. And so there's explaining, the power of explanation is very big. But yeah, I did that, that was dumb, I wish I hadn't. And then you can spring forward with an intention to do better in the future, and perhaps even an opportunity to go and repair the damage that was done. That isn't always the case, but perhaps. So it's always this idea of the automatic thing that we've mostly done most of our lives, catching yourself doing it, and just making this subtle little adjustment where it goes from being what we would say maladaptive to adaptive. A little adjustment where it goes from being something that's going to just put you back on the treadmill and the same cycle of stress and overwhelm you were in before, versus a kind of, an ability to pull out from that, just make a little cognitive shift, a little mental shift, and actually pull away from that in a different direction. Yeah, it's almost like achieving some sort of, what they call it in aeronautics, they talk about the exit velocity, the amount of velocity you need to escape the gravitational field of the Earth, that with that little bit of switch of thinking gives you that extra boost of power you need to sort of pull away from the way of thinking and cyclic behavior that's been pulling you down into stress in the past. And there's nothing unusual about you if you have been experiencing that type of stress, right? That just makes you very normal, especially in the 21st century. Of course, that can go on to lead to crippling anxiety and depression and all sorts of other things. Okay, so that's the approach that we're taking, understanding what's going on, what's happening to me, and then responding to that in a new way, right? In the past, maybe I get stressed, I respond to that by going to the fridge, or I get stressed and I respond to that by, online shopping is a big one these days, or I respond to that by however it might be. And don't even think about it, it's just natural, automatic. So it's about catching that and thinking, oh, this is happening. I've got a better approach to this now. I've got a better way through this. Oh, I'm being pulled into this empathic distress. Actually, I know what to do about that. And that is the compassion training that, you would have learned. Okay, of course, a lot of you, this is new right now, so you haven't learned it. You do need to go away and do that training, of course. But I hope this is making sense for you. So having said all that, I'm just going to try to demonstrate it with a little model, if you like, or a little diagram. Let's start here. So I'm, I don't know, visiting a friend of mine who's sick, which, you know, or maybe I'm Zoom meeting with a friend of mine who's sick, who knows? Maybe I'm meeting someone who's just, you know, sad and upset about something that happened to them, who knows? But when I interact with them or when I engage with them, I have an empathic response, right? I start to share in their experience. And so here's something I haven't talked about in this series, which is really important. But I've stayed away from talking about emotions too much, which is a lot of what I do. But there is one important thing you sort of need to know. When we become emotional, right? When you become emotional, immediately emotions have evolved to be short-term fixes, right? It's just a short-term thing to deal with an issue that's right there in front of you. It's true for anger, sadness. They have particular themes you can talk about. Anger, sadness, whether it's, you know, contempt or fear. That's what they're for. And in that time, when you're in the grip of that emotion, everything is about you. That's what they've sort of evolved for. They kind of save our lives and they get us through difficult situations and help us out. So emotions literally make the world about you, okay? Which is quite hard if you think, if you're triggered emotionally and you're trying to develop compassion, this is a bit hard, because in compassion, you're trying to have a focus outward there on other people's difficulty and this, your aspiration they not experience it, maybe even the motivation to try to help, right? So your sort of focus needs to be out there, and it has to be about the other people, which is hard when you're emotional because, you know, hundreds, thousands of generations of evolution have actually made that moment about you. It's not your fault. Again, it's not your fault. It's evolution, right? And mostly it works. So in a case of an empathic response, so if I meet someone who's emotional for one reason or another, and then I start to share in that as well, the world is rearranging itself to be all about me at that moment, okay? It's really important to understand this. So yeah, I was triggered because I'm high in empathy, which we consider kind of an admirable trait a lot of times, no worries. But at that moment now that I'm all sad or angry or afraid as well, then it's kind of all about me. So what's happened then is we call it attentional capture. So your attention's captured, pulled away beyond your control. All sorts of things happen just because of that, right? Just because your attention's pulled away, you spike in cortisol and adrenaline and these sorts of things that you can't even control. Just from your attention being pulled away. And at that moment, then you become emotional as well. Well, then now the world's about you. And what's going to happen from here, especially if you're a nurse or a doctor or a psychologist or just a carer for your family, be they healthy or otherwise, right? That it's going to lead to emotional exhaustion because you've got your own emotions, which for most of us is enough, right? But now you're going to add to that with everybody else's, and it's going to lead to this idea of burnout, or what is commonly and mistakenly, tragically often referred to as compassion fatigue. So if this model that you have in front of you, I'm just going to get rid of that because few terms have caused more damage in the healthcare industry than that one, I reckon, and bring this one back in. We'll call it empathic distress. This actually explains what's happening. Okay, compassion fatigue. I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to suggest that I don't believe in human history anyone has ever burned out, right? Or even become that fatigued just from wishing people didn't suffer. You know, I don't think so. In fact, a lot of the anecdotal evidence of thousands of years of contemplatives and also modern scientific evidence in the last 25 years or so suggests that when compassion is done right, it's invigorating, you know, it helps people, strengthens them. Yeah. So that's what you've got. In a normal situation, you have empathy, your attention's captured. Why? Well, you're emotional now, so your attention's captured by this and away you go. And actually that leads to emotional exhaustion, burnout, and empathic distress. And the reason people, I'm just gonna come up, the reason people object to this or don't like what I'm saying, if this feels uncomfortable for you, the reason people don't like it is because they think, no, I'm really high empathy, which means it's about others, And now what you're telling me is that when this high empathy is actually about me, which is again not exactly true. What I'm saying, and I have a lot of support in this, is when you're emotional, it's about you, right? One of the ways that you get triggered emotionally is the distress of others, and often the happiness too, which is nice to know. Is the distress of others. And so when you are triggered, it is about you. So the empathy is about the other people. But once that empathy has triggered you emotionally, now it's made to be about you. And what you'll start to do is self-regulate. You go into an automatic emotional regulation sort of routine, right? I'll give you some. I'll run these parallel for you soon, because I want to give you an alternative here. I've mentioned already, just as with genuine happiness and hedonic happiness, just as with regret and guilt, when you catch it happening, there are things you can do, of course. One of the things that you can do is pull your attention back, which of course requires mindfulness training, which we'll talk about a little. But if you think about it like this, because I'll come back, it's really important. This idea of attention capture is really important. Attention's it's kind of captured by the emotional trigger or by the emotion itself even. When I notice that happen, if I actually just relax and bring my awareness back, right, then all this other stuff is gone. Okay, literally, because that was all just automatic things. That was that you didn't have to think about. They didn't require anything from you. That's just that's the sort of pattern that you've rehearsed probably your entire life. Okay, maybe even had it reinforced by other people. Once you pull your attention back, things are entirely different, right? Because now you can develop this empathic concern. You can actually put your attention back out on the distress of the other person, right? It's counterintuitive, I know, but if you want to be compassionate, right? And if we'll talk about meditation as cultivation, but when you want to cultivate compassion, what you have to focus on is the difficulty and distress of the people you're developing compassion for. Right? You can't sit around just thinking of compassion, compassion, compassion. Well, we say in English, meditate on compassion, and if you've seen the last 2 days, you'll know that actually, if you look in Pali, Sanskrit, certainly Tibetan and Chinese is debatable. I've had a few talks with Chinese scholars about this, but the way they talk about it, or an accurate way of translating it, would be cultivate compassion. You don't meditate on compassion, because sitting around going compassion, 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 compassion won't help, right? You will not increase your levels of compassion. Why not? Well, what is compassion? This is why the terminology is so important. Compassion is this understanding of another person's situation and the wish to alleviate their suffering, right? So sitting around focusing on me going compassion, compassion, compassion will be of no benefit when I encounter people who are suffering, either in real time, on the television, or just in my memory, right? It won't be any help. So actually, this is where it gets so hard. The empathy sort of thing happens, and I have to notice that's happening to me, right? Which mindfulness training will do for you. You get that for free. The empathy. So notice that I'm having this empathic response. Just relax into it. Bring my attention back and put my attention back out very deliberately on what's in front of me. And so then you end up with what we call, say, compassion satisfaction, or pro-social responses. Now you're responding not based on a kind of automatic response of my own emotion regulation triggered by empathy, right? Now what I'm operating on is my focus on another person's situation, right, and what to do about them, and my focus is very much out there. Okay, so you have these two sort of options, if you like. When you have an empathic response, you've got this top line, which is what most of us do. This is automatic. You don't have to intentionally train in this. This will just happen to you, right? Empathic response, your attention's captured, it becomes self-focused, and then it just leads to emotional exhaustion. Because not only are you already trying to regulate your own emotions before you're empathically set off, right? Now you've got all that going on as well, right? I mean, think about a teacher. You've got 25 rowdy kids in the room, or maybe more if you're unfortunate. There's a lot of stuff coming at you from an empathic response. And if you don't know what to do with that, then I would suggest burning out and becoming completely exhausted, makes you kind of normal. I think you should expect that, right? Certainly in the healthcare profession. So that's what you've got. You have this idea of this mindfulness. It helps you do the perspective taking, which is focusing outward, and then of course emotion regulation as well. So while I'm here, I'll give you an example. I often give, to so you can understand what I'm talking about, because I know that this actually requires a little bit of thought for a lot of people. It requires a lot of repetition. I can tell you, I've been doing this for years. So imagine that you are in a situation where you have a baby needs its nappy changed, a diaper changed if you're North American, however you want to call that. So we know that babies can cry in such a way. I mean, it must be evolutionary. They can make these sounds that just get your attention, right? They set you off empathically in a very, very big way. And so what would happen for most people, I would argue, is you hear a baby cry, you would immediately just respond to the cry. And most parents, even early childhood carers, would know right away what it's about, and just launch into this, changing the nappy, changing the diaper, right? Great. An empathic response completely works. This is evolution at its finest, really. But again, whether or not that in a lot of that interaction was not necessarily about the child, because of course, once you're emotional as well, it's a lot about your own emotion regulation. So it becomes mixed. Yeah. Here's what would happen for someone who's done some mindfulness and compassion training and understands and sees a person in distress, or a little baby in distress in this case, as an opportunity to get it right, and avoid fatigue and burnout. Same thing, an empathic response. Now I'm stressed as well because the baby's letting loose over there. Great. Notice that it's happening, and really shift, very, very deliberately shift my attention back out onto the child, right? And think, oh, you're uncomfortable, I'm going to fix your discomfort. It's not about my discomfort at all. It's about yours. And you go ahead and do what needs to be done. And that is actually what you've done is motivated yourself with a compassionate response and carried through with compassionate action. And here's the interesting part. If you have these two people standing side by side and you watch this play out, from where you're standing, what they're doing will look exactly the same, right? You're not going to say, oh, that's a compassionate response and that's an empathic one. You won't know. All that's different is what these people have done mentally. It's a cognitive little shift, right? And that's what will make the difference for them. And that's what will make one of them kind of fatigue and slow down and get tired, even irritable over time. And actually the other one will avoid all that. And even if you're really good at it, go from strength to strength as they go through encountering people who are in distress. You need a bit of training for that, but it certainly can be done. So that's how these two things work, in that what you're looking at in front of you on the screen, these two pathways, the automatic empathic response, which is, okay. And my argument would be that that's been evolutionarily beneficial, which is why we do it. Or the other very attentive, attention under your control, deliberate response, where you're very clearly focusing on the other. And I've presented this to lots of people, lots of healthcare professionals. The people I was most interested in talking about this were the paramedic, so third-year paramedic students who've been out in the field a few times. And because of course they're under so much stress, they even have people they're trying to help, abusing them and getting in their way, and it can be unbelievable what these people go through. And when I sort of started talking to these groups of them, saying it's really hard to make it about the person in front of you, they sort of mostly just said, hell yeah, it is hard. And they also agreed for the most part that to the extent to which they can do that, make it about the person in front of them, the less they're going to be susceptible to burnout and possibly even PTSD and these other issues that paramedics really struggle with. So this is not trivial. This is not just some kind of like semantics. This is actually this is like a Copernican shift. One day, Copernicus, I'm really interested in him because one day he woke up and he just was sure that the earth was going around the sun, you know, and he still had to do everything else, probably, I don't know, pack his kids' lunches and send them to school or whatever he had to do. But yeah, everything's completely shifted. Right? No one looking from the outside would know. And this sort of way of thinking is the same. It's true in terms of the happiness I mentioned. It's true in terms of regret and guilt. And it's very much true here. It's this complete new way of thinking about things that no one's actually going to notice necessarily you're doing, because it's very cognitive, it's very mental. And of course, you probably won't be surprised to hear that one of the most important aspects of getting good at this and being able to do this is mindfulness, right? It really is. Remember, I've talked before, mindfulness it means remember, and you cultivate mindfulness. You don't meditate on mindfulness or mindfulness meditation, these things. You cultivate mindfulness, which is an ability to remember. And if you can remember that, oh, this is probably hedonic happiness, even though it's going, oh, it looks like genuine happiness, and you can remember that, oh, it's probably hedonic, and I can just engage with it differently. I can lower my expectations, or perhaps I can use this in a way that will help me achieve genuine happiness. There's all sorts of things you can do with that. This is a very introductory series, so I won't go through all those details. Or same with guilt and regret. You go, oh my God, I'm just awful. Like, what's wrong with me? I am awful. I think, oh, actually, no, the actions were regrettable and the actions weren't very helpful, but it's not me, it's my actions. You need to remember that. That's why mindfulness training helps, and then you've got the same thing here. It's like, oh, here's an empathic response. This isn't a compassionate response, right? But I could turn it into one. And empathy is actually dangerous on its own. Unless it's got compassion to support it, it's quite dangerous. So again, this idea of mindfulness training, of remembering. And then when you do the training, which of course involves meditation, let's say, involves those sessions, but not because it's a type of escapism where you can spend 15, 20, 30 minutes, escaping the, drudgery of my otherwise, unsatisfactory life, and then get back to it, that's hedonic, right? And a lot of meditation teachers treat meditation as a hedonic response. Oh, here's 20 minutes you can have to yourself. Here's 20 minutes. Yeah, well, I don't know. That's just selling it so short. It's tragic. What it should be is training to help you remember what needs to be done when you need to remember, right? And then you've got this paradox where the more aroused you are, we say, the more intensely triggered or the more emotional you are, the more likely you are to do the same things you've always done before. These automatic responses. It's very hard when you're in highly charged situations to be innovative and do something new. Of course, if you do the mindfulness training, you will be able to, because you'll remember, I tried this in the past and it didn't work. I've thought of this other idea that might be, I'll try this. Whether it's relationship with a person or a project, it doesn't matter. So what happens then if you do the mindfulness training, the remembering training, if you like, you catch yourself earlier. You catch yourself earlier in an emotional reaction. You catch yourself earlier when you're feeling guilty. You catch yourself earlier when you're really chasing after something hedonic, expecting a genuine payoff, right? You catch yourself earlier when you're having this empathic response, getting emotional. You catch yourself sooner. And then you can prevent a regrettable episode emotionally. You can notice your misinterpretations because you'll have studied them before. Maybe, outside with me, maybe in this Beyond Mindfulness Method course, maybe somewhere outside, you'll have learned these things. And now the mindfulness training helps you implement them in real time, which is the whole purpose. And of course, you need to remember to change your reactions, change your behavior. And in amongst all that, you'll also end up being more relaxed. And that is, you get better at being able to be very deeply relaxed when you're actually doing meditation sessions, of course, which is great. Relaxation is a skill you can learn. And again, there are different types of relaxation. And what we're talking about here is your very much birthright, base level, natural state, right? Not sitting around watching TV or watching sport with everyone, or these sorts of things I mentioned the other day. But also importantly, you can stay calm in highly charged situations. And this refers back to what I just said, because the more I can stay calm in a charged situation, the more opportunities are open to me, right? And so everyone else around me might be getting stressed and maybe emotional. And what they're starting to do is all the same shit they've done before, because that's how emotions work, right? And then someone who can just stay relaxed, they have these opportunities to do something different, to short circuit the previous behaviors and so on. That's true for relationships with people. It's true for addictions, right? If you can stay relaxed, even while you have withdrawal symptoms from cigarettes, then you can be very innovative with the way you engage with a packet of cigarettes. I have worked with people in the past on exactly this, and if someone catches themselves with a withdrawal symptom and they're automatically reaching for cigarettes, and then they notice it thanks to their mindfulness training, and then they have a plan thanks to the discussions that we've had, and they just spend a moment reflecting on how much they'd like to give up cigarettes, how unpleasant it is for the other people around them. They spend a moment just reflecting on all the negative or the drawbacks of the cigarettes, and then you can go ahead and have one, right? And at some point people start thinking, I don't really want it, and they start putting it off, and eventually they train themselves to have a like a withdrawal symptom reaction that they very quickly transform into a reflection on how much they don't really like smoking. This is, just like some people say, you're brainwashing yourself. I say, well, yeah, maybe, but it seems to work. Yeah, so it takes more stress to really put you off your game. All right. So I haven't put anything in here about mindfulness. So I'm just going to say one thing is that there are lots of different approaches and ideas about mindfulness. That's because there's so many different types of people, right? So do find one that works for you. People ask me about meditation teachers and approaches, and for my money, the sort of the lowest bar to set for me is a person who can explain the training easily, so you can understand, right? And explain why it would work so that you can understand. If when people start saying not being able to do those things, just explain how to do the practice and how to notice you're getting better, and why it improves the rest of your life, and how to notice when the rest of your life is getting better, right? Then you pay some attention, right? But if someone can't explain those things, then you're wasting your time dealing with these people. So let's have a look. Let's summarize, shall we? I've been talking about genuine happiness, realistically, and cultivating causes. And I've said kindness, compassion, attention, control, and genuine relaxation are causes. That should make some sense to you if this is the third of this series, right? And now you actually know the idea of what compassion actually is. And have a think about this, please. This is critically important. Let's say you've got this idea going, wow, that makes sense. The genuine happiness thing is cool, I'm into it. And compassion. And you think, right, as most of your friends probably do, that compassion and empathy are the same, right? Here's what's going to happen. You're going to charge off thinking, yeah, compassion is going to help me with genuine happiness. It's not, because it's just empathy, and it's going to drive you to burnout. And you're going to think that either compassion is harmful and doesn't help, and that there is such a thing as compassion fatigue, which is disastrous, right? When in actual fact, you're experiencing empathic distress. Worse than that might be that you think, oh, this idea of genuine happiness is rubbish. It doesn't exist at all, right? Why? Because you went to try to achieve it without trying to put the causes in place and without trying to eliminate the mistakes that misinterpret it. Anyway, please, if I'm going through this quite quickly, if this catches your attention, you can get in touch with me, even if we haven't met before, okay? So ask me these questions, send me messages, join the Facebook group, email, it doesn't matter. It's so important that people understand this, that I don't mind spending the time helping people with it. So here we have, just what I've been talking about. So if you really want to think of happiness as an antidote to stress, which I reckon works and makes perfect sense, you need to cultivate the causes of that genuine happiness, and you need to understand those causes. The only way you can do that is by eliminating these misinterpretations and mistakes. Yeah. And yeah, we've already looked at this here. Okay. So for my money, from my perspective, I've done my very best to fulfill this. 3 days in a row, I've said, look, I really want to try to show you how you can interrupt some really serious underlying causes of stress, right? And find ways to pull stress out from the root, not address these symptoms on the surface, which will only have kind of short-term effects anyway, right? So yeah, you want to know if you're drowning things out or if you're figuring it out, you know, but as much as you can, you want to, in fact, here's another example. So I'd zoom back a bit. Say, let's say you're really stressed and so your natural reaction to stress is to drown it out, which it is for most people. And you've done some mindfulness training, you go, oh, actually, this probably won't help. This is drowning it out. I should actually be more curious about my stress and look at it and see what's causing it, what's going on. You know, what do I know? What can I do? That's actually, so again, the mindfulness training can interrupt even on this very broad general level. So, oh, I'm drowning it out probably won't help, you know. Or you might think, yeah, I'm just in the mood to drown it out. Yeah, I've said this before. I'm in the mood to drown it out, and that is my expectation. I will drown it out for 90 minutes in front of the TV or something, and I know I'll be back to where I started, but at least I'll have had a break. It's okay. Just know what you're doing. You know, be aware of what's going on. That's what's important. And that when you're getting advice from people who say, just go out in nature or just sit quietly or what was it? Use natural healing products on your body and these sorts of things, that those people are very, very firmly in the drown it out category. Yeah, well, I should say that advice is very, very firmly, unarguably in the drown it out category, right? Not in the actual addressing it from the root. And that's, you know, if it sounds exciting and sounds interesting, that's great, but you do need to be ready to do the work, of course. It's not easy. So this is what we've looked at. That's how it worked. For those of you who are interested, of course, you'd like some support if this makes sense, you can, there's a few things I can do for you. Join the Facebook group if you're on Facebook. If you are not on Facebook, congratulations and stay off it. Don't join my group. Facebook, yeah, it does more harm than good, I think, for the most part. Get in touch with me and I'll send you this guide which can help you get started. Or just send me a message if you're interested in the Beyond Mindfulness method. Or even what I've been doing with some people, I'm a bit short of time, but if you are interested in having a one-on-one conversation with me for 30 minutes, that's possible too. So just get in touch and we'll sort out a time. I'll send you my calendar and we can talk about some strategies and tools that you can start using right away. Maybe you are interested in this Beyond Mindfulness method. That's cool. We can talk about that as well. But just sort of be clear that this is not a quick fix. It does require to rethink some things that you believe, right? And of course, it takes 20 minutes a day to do the mindfulness and other training. And it also takes more time to do the learning and these sorts of stuff that's involved. So if you don't have 20 minutes a day and another sort of half hour, 45 minutes during the week to put aside to this, then yeah, find another way. I can't really help. So have a think about that. Okay. Get in touch with me. I will put the link in the YouTube thing in the bottom. But what's more important than any of that, because that just feels a bit unnecessary, is there any questions from the people who are here or perhaps on Facebook? I'll pop over and have a look. Yep, so a couple of you have just commented as you go on the Facebook group here, I can see. Yeah, carrying other person's emotions, that's right. That's what happens. And it's, so Jojo, I hope I say that right, you're saying, I experienced, this emotional distress and felt burned out carrying other people's stuff. That's right. And it's a very, very, what's the word? It's very, very simple. I mean, it's not easy, actually. It's a very, very simple trick, though, is to go, oh, actually, now, because I'm carrying their stuff, and that means I'm emotional, and that means it's about me. And that's okay. I got to hammer this home. That's normal. There's nothing wrong with people. That's how emotions work, right? It's why they work so well. The trouble is that, for a simple little cognitive parlor trick, I call it sometimes, just switching your attention out to the other person and their distress and wondering about that shifts all your attention is now no longer on your own distress. It's out there on that other person, you know. And it's hard and people don't like it because people think because I'm resonating and empathically responding and all distressed along with you, that makes me compassionate, you know, and it doesn't, right? It just doesn't. And it doesn't from a Buddhist perspective, and it doesn't from a dictionary perspective either, clearly, right? They're different. And it's really important. You need to train in that compassion. And if you look, there's a book by Paul Ekman called something like Towards Global Compassion, I think, which he has a lot of conversations with the Dalai Lama, and they talk about this. But his research, he has this, he calls it biological compassion. There seems to be this short level of, you know, connectedness with people that we're in our inner circle, that where we do respond in, you know, trying to help them. And the further you go from that, the harder it gets, and that the more training it takes. There's also research to back up, right, that the further you can extend that reach of compassion, especially just uncontrived automatic compassion, then the more that helps you in your mental health. There are huge payoffs for this, and that's scientifically sort of based. All right, thanks, Claire. Yep. Yeah, just if you're interested in setting up a time, just send me an email or a message, and we can we'll put together some time to talk. All right, I've stopped doing one-on-one consults that I used to do, just because I'm trying to get on top of my PhD, amongst other things, which is why I put together that online course, so it's just on demand and you can access it whenever. Okay. All right, well, so some of you are on the Facebook group, because I'm looking at that now. You can just send me a message if you're interested. If you're on YouTube, I'll just put it in a link below. Just get in touch with me if you're curious. And the rest of you, yeah, email, however, get in touch. All right. Well, that's basically it. Yeah. So I'll do this again sometime. Thanks. I see several of you from the Beyond Mindfulness method have showed up, and I know that you're here, so that's cool. Thank you. It's your questions in that course that are giving me some material to work with out here for everyone else. So that's if you want to, you can turn that into a compassionate act, right? You can just sit there and just be, you know, really pleased that the questions you're asking are helping, you know, maybe get out there to other people, right? It'll only benefit your own mental health. And I will see you all next time. So stay in touch, and I'll let you know when I put something on like this, maybe early in the new year. I have some ideas of what I'd like to do. I think I'm going to put up just an Ask Me Anything page for a little while, and then I might do a session where I can respond to some of the more common, interesting, or actually bizarre questions I get asked. All right. Okay, everyone. Thank you all. Nice to see you, familiar faces and new ones. And I hope your holidays, et cetera, are good. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Oh, yeah. Stop you. That's me.